The Strait of Hormuz crisis has everyone asking one question: will this finally turn into all-out war? The answer matters because the stakes are not just about oil prices or regional stability. They are about whether the Islamic Republic can survive without being at war with itself and its neighbors. Most analysts see a series of escalations that might end in negotiation or catastrophe. I'm going to show you something different. This is not an escalation cycle. It is a structural lock-in where de-escalation poses a far greater threat to Tehran's survival than the conflict itself. To understand why, we have to look past the headlines and examine the economic reality facing Iran since 2006. A rigorous analysis by Spruik found that this sustained confrontation with the West has caused output losses comparable to full-blown civil wars. The data shows a deep, persistent shock that erodes political stability and rule of law across decades. This is not temporary pain from sanctions. It is an institutional transformation where isolation has become embedded in the state's long-term economic fabric. The regime did not just survive this pressure, it restructured itself to operate within it. Consider what happens when you try to normalize relations after 20 years of crisis management. For a normal government, peace brings prosperity and stability. But for Tehran, peace is a failure mode that could collapse the entire system. The security apparatus built over 2 decades relies on an external threat narrative to justify its massive budget and political power. Without the specter of war or imminent invasion from the West, there is no logical reason to maintain such a vast military-industrial complex dedicated to regime defense. If you remove the enemy, you undermine the very foundation of their authority. This creates what strategists call a sunk cost trap. The parallel economy and security networks that have become the only remaining power base for hardliners would be dismantled by any genuine normalization process. A peace treaty requires transparency, openness to international trade, and a reduction in military spending. All 3 of these requirements threaten to expose corruption, break up patronage networks, and strip the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of its economic empire. The regime has bet everything on perpetual crisis because that is the only environment where their current structure remains viable. Quick resource note: I keep a curated set of Amazon search links in the description for books, gear, and tools relevant to this channel's topics. Some are affiliate links, so I may earn a commission at no extra cost to you. Please consider supporting the channel by using those links if you find something useful. Now consider the specific role of the Strait of Hormuz in this equation. This choke point functions as a single point of failure for the Iranian economy. If Tehran were to close it completely, they would trigger immediate state bankruptcy and likely spark social unrest from within. The global market response would be swift and devastating, cutting off whatever revenue streams remain. But keeping it open under constant threat allows them to extract rent while maintaining control without triggering total economic collapse. It is a high-wire act that requires just enough tension to justify the security budget, but not so much that they lose all leverage or income. The strategic logic here favors the status quo over any path to peace. A prolonged low-intensity conflict acts as a pressure valve for internal tensions and provides a constant justification for resource allocation to the Revolutionary Guard Corps. In this view, war is not a policy failure, it is a functional necessity for regime survival. The costs of isolation are now baked into their institutional architecture in ways that cannot be easily reversed without risking total systemic collapse. We can see the financial weight of this decision when we look at the projected costs of actual warfare versus continued confrontation. Models like Operation Ultimatum 2026 project a direct spending drain of $16 billion for any full-scale conflict, not to mention significant long-term liabilities regarding veteran care and infrastructure reconstruction. These are staggering figures that would bankrupt a state with limited reserves. Yet these same models lack real-world adoption data because the alternative is even worse. The absence of specific analysis on how controlling this geography functions as a regime survival strategy highlights a critical gap in our understanding, but the logic remains clear. De-escalation removes the justification for the authoritarian infrastructure that keeps them in power. Any signal from Tehran suggesting they want peace would be interpreted by domestic hardliners not as diplomacy, but as a precursor to regime change. This creates a feedback loop where leadership must escalate rhetoric or take provocative actions just to maintain internal cohesion. If they stop fighting, the factions within their own security services will turn on each other, and the central authority may crumble under its own weight. The political feasibility of ending this cycle is effectively zero, because returning to pre-crisis status quo would dismantle the very networks that hold the state together today. The result is a situation where every escalation feels like progress toward war, but actually functions as a stabilizing mechanism for internal politics. This explains why we see repeated crises in Hormuz without ever reaching a breaking point. The system has found an equilibrium where low-intensity warfare is cheaper and safer than peace. It allows the regime to consolidate power, distribute resources through patronage networks, and deflect blame onto external enemies while avoiding the total economic ruin that would come from closing the strait or engaging in full-scale war with superior adversaries. So when you see another threat issued by Tehran regarding Hormuz, do not assume it is a prelude to battle. Assume it is a signal of internal necessity. The regime needs this tension to exist because without it, they have no reason to remain in power as currently structured. The crisis is the product, and de-escalation is the risk that threatens their entire existence. This structural lock-in means we should expect continued low-intensity conflict for the foreseeable future, unless there is a fundamental collapse of the regime itself or an external shock so severe it forces a complete restructuring of Iranian governance from the outside in. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I am a one-person team working hard to make each video better than the last. Subscribe if you found value. It is the best way to show support. Drop a comment with your biggest takeaway. See you in the next video.